Your scan tool says there's a camshaft sensor problem. Maybe you're seeing a code like P0340, P0341, or your engine has started running rough, taking longer to start, or the check engine light suddenly came on. So naturally, the first thing most people think is, the camshaft sensor must be bad, but that's not always true. In fact, a surprising number of camshaft sensors get replaced, only for the exact same problem to come right back. Why? Because the sensor was never the real problem in the first place. A damaged wire, poor electrical connections, incorrect mechanical timing, or even another engine sensor can all create the same symptoms and even trigger the same trouble codes, while the camshaft sensor itself is still working perfectly. So before you spend money replacing the sensor, let me show you 5 signs that your camshaft sensor may not actually be bad and how to narrow down the real cause of the problem. Number 1. The sensor has proper power and ground. Let's start with one of the most overlooked causes, a missing power supply or a poor ground connection. Many people assume that if a camshaft sensor code appears, the sensor itself must have failed. But here's the problem. Even a brand new sensor can't work without the electrical power it needs. Most modern camshaft position sensors are Hall effect sensors. They rely on a reference voltage from the engine computer, along with a solid ground connection, to generate an accurate signal. If either one is missing, the sensor simply can't communicate with the engine computer, even though the sensor itself may still be in perfect working condition. This happens more often than many people realize. A blown fuse, a damaged power wire, or a loose engine ground can all interrupt the sensor's electrical supply. From the engine computer's point of view, the result looks almost exactly the same as a failed sensor. The computer only knows that the expected signal isn't there. It doesn't automatically know whether the sensor failed or whether the sensor never had the power to operate in the first place. That's why replacing the sensor often doesn't solve the problem. Before buying a new camshaft sensor, verify that the sensor is actually receiving the proper reference voltage and that the ground circuit has a good connection. If either one is missing, restoring the electrical supply may completely solve the problem without replacing the sensor at all. But what if the power supply and ground both test perfectly and you're still getting a camshaft sensor code? The next thing to inspect is something that causes just as many false diagnoses. Number 2. The wiring or connector has problems. Now let's assume you've already verified that the sensor is receiving proper power and ground. At that point, many people assume the sensor has to be bad. But there's another problem that's just as common, and it's hiding between the sensor and the engine computer, the wiring and connector. A camshaft position sensor doesn't send its signal directly into the engine. It sends that signal through a wiring harness and electrical connectors before it ever reaches the engine computer. If that path is damaged, the computer may never receive a reliable signal, even though the sensor is working exactly as it should. This can happen because of corrosion inside the connector, loose or bent terminals, damaged insulation, or wires that have rubbed against the engine and broken internally. In fact, some wiring damage isn't visible from the outside at all. The insulation may look perfectly normal, while the copper wire inside has already fractured from years of engine vibration, heat, and constant movement. From the engine computer's perspective, a missing signal caused by damaged wiring looks almost identical to a failed camshaft sensor. That's why simply replacing the sensor often leaves the original problem untouched. Before replacing any sensor, inspect the connector carefully. Look for corrosion, oil contamination, bent terminals, loose pins, or damaged wiring near the connector. A few minutes of inspection can save you from replacing a perfectly good sensor. But let's say the wiring checks out, the connector is clean, and the electrical circuit looks exactly as it should. There's still one problem that can make a healthy sensor appear faulty, and it has nothing to do with electricity. It comes from the engine's mechanical timing. Number 3. The mechanical timing is off. Now let's assume you've checked the power supply, the ground, and the wiring. and everything looks perfectly normal. At this point, many people replace the camshaft sensor. But there's another possibility that often gets overlooked. The sensor may actually be telling the truth. Here's what that means. A camshaft position sensor doesn't create the camshaft's position. It simply reports where the camshaft is. If the engine's mechanical timing is no longer correct, the sensor will accurately report that incorrect position. In other words, the sensor is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It's simply reporting a mechanical problem instead of an electrical one. This can happen when a timing chain has stretched, a timing belt has slipped, or the reluctor wheel attached to the camshaft has been damaged or moved out of position. When that happens, the engine computer compares the camshaft signal with the crankshaft signal and notices that they are no longer synchronized. The result, it may store a camshaft sensor trouble code, even though the sensor itself is working perfectly. This is one of the reasons replacing the sensor doesn't always solve the problem. The new sensor reports the exact same camshaft position because the mechanical timing hasn't changed. If you've already ruled out electrical problems, it's worth checking whether the engine has signs of a stretched timing chain, a slipped timing belt, or abnormal mechanical timing before replacing any more parts. Because until the mechanical problem is corrected, even a brand new sensor will continue reporting the same incorrect timing relationship. But what if the mechanical timing is exactly where it should be, and you're still getting a camshaft sensor code? The next possibility isn't the camshaft sensor at all. It's another sensor that the engine computer depends on just as much. Number 4. Another sensor is causing the problem. Now let's say you've already checked the power supply, inspected the wiring, and verified that the engine's mechanical timing is correct. At this point, many people are convinced the camshaft sensor has to be the problem. But there's one more component you shouldn't ignore: the crankshaft position sensor. Here's why. The engine computer doesn't rely on the camshaft sensor alone. It constantly compares the camshaft signal with the crankshaft signal to make sure both shafts remain properly synchronized. If the crankshaft sensor begins sending an unstable signal, drops out intermittently, or stops communicating altogether, the engine computer can no longer compare the two signals accurately. As a result, it may set a camshaft-related trouble code, even though the camshaft sensor is working exactly as it should. Think of it this way. Imagine trying to compare two clocks. If one clock suddenly stops, you can't tell whether the other clock is wrong or if the stopped clock is the real problem. The engine computer faces the same situation. It knows the two signals no longer agree, but it can't always determine which sensor caused the mismatch. That's why replacing the camshaft sensor may not change anything. The real problem could still be the crankshaft sensor or its wiring, preventing the engine computer from calculating accurate valve timing. If the electrical circuit, mechanical timing, and camshaft sensor all appear normal, don't overlook the crankshaft sensor before replacing more parts. Because sometimes the camshaft sensor is simply being blamed for a problem it didn't create. But what if every related component checks out? The wiring is good, the timing is correct, and both sensors appear to be operating normally. There's one final step that can tell you whether the camshaft sensor is actually bad, and it only takes a proper electrical test to find out. Number 5. The sensor passes electrical testing. By this point, you've checked the power supply, inspected the wiring, ruled out mechanical timing problems, and even considered the crankshaft sensor. So, how do you know if the camshaft sensor is actually bad? The answer is simple. Test the sensor itself. A proper electrical test can tell you far more than a trouble code ever will. Depending on the type of camshaft sensor your vehicle uses, the testing procedure may be slightly different. A magnetic sensor can often be checked by measuring its internal resistance, while a Hall effect sensor should be tested by verifying its power supply, ground, and signal output. If the sensor produces the correct electrical signal and the power, ground, wiring, and mechanical timing have all checked out, then replacing the sensor is unlikely to solve the problem. At that point, it's time to look beyond the sensor itself and continue diagnosing the rest of the circuit or engine management system. On the other hand, if the sensor fails its electrical tests, shows no output signal, or its readings fall outside the manufacturer's specifications, then you've finally found solid evidence that the sensor itself has failed. That's an important difference. A trouble code only tells you where the engine computer detected a problem. It doesn't automatically identify the failed part. A proper electrical test gives you real evidence, so you're making a repair based on diagnosis, not guesswork. And that's exactly how professional technicians avoid replacing good parts. So, before replacing any camshaft sensor, remember these 5 signs. Verify the power and ground. Inspect the wiring and connector. Check the engine's mechanical timing. Don't overlook the crankshaft sensor. And finally, confirm the sensor with proper electrical testing. Following those steps can save you money, prevent unnecessary repairs, and help you identify the real cause of the problem the first time. A camshaft sensor code can certainly point you in the right direction, but it should never be the only reason to replace the sensor. As you've seen, a missing power supply, damaged wiring, incorrect mechanical timing, or even a faulty crankshaft sensor can all make a perfectly good camshaft sensor appear to be the problem. That's why the best diagnosis always starts with testing, not guessing. Taking a few extra minutes to inspect and verify the problem can save you from unnecessary repairs, wasted money, and replacing parts that were never faulty in the first place. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more practical automotive diagnostics that help you find the real problem before replacing expensive parts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.